You start letting people's rights be trampled on, you think it's going to end at green card holders. What if we combine this with the denaturalization theory that the government also has, right? Trump also thinks that there are a lot of people who aren't really citizens because the 14th Amendment doesn't apply to them. He also wants to, by the way, deport U.S. citizens. He's talked about deporting U.S. citizens, sending people to Guantanamo Bay. You don't know in which ways these rights violations are going to accumulate and affect citizens. And so there's a reason why we're trying to protect this right of green card holders, not just because we care about green card holders, but also because we're concerned that an overreach by the government as to green card holders might have cascading effects as to citizens. Yeah. Hey, folks, please like, comment, and subscribe. And make sure to check out my newsletter. Information is in the description.
I don't know enough about this to like debate you on it, so I don't want to bust your bubble, but
100%. No,
I'm just telling you what I was just saying what I read. And are you not talking about the deporting the kid with the?
Yeah, that's what I'm talking
about. Doing the Hamas protest, right? And everybody's framing it like it's a free speech thing, and I just don't think that's why. Why are we talking about it like it's a free speech thing?
Because it is a free speech thing, and I'm happy to explain that if you'd like.
But sure, yeah. I mean, why are they afforded the same, like all of the same protections, like free speech?
So I don't think that I'm gonna use the term alien here, okay? Because that's a term as used in the statutes. I don't think that, in other words, a non-citizen. I don't think that aliens are afforded the exact same rights as Americans. The question is which rights apply to people and persons, and which rights apply specifically to citizens. So in the Constitution, for example, it gives certain qualifications for different offices. It says you have to be a citizen X amount of years. But in other parts of the Constitution, for example, in the Bill of Rights, it says, the right of the people to keep and bear arms shall not be infringed. Or it'll say something to the effect of the right of the people to be secure in their papers, persons and effects in the Fourth Amendment. Or it'll say something like Congress shall make no law abridging the freedom of speech. So those are different ways that different rights are phrased. And sometimes in the case of, running for office, or if it's the 14th Amendment's privileges or immunities clause, it's phrased in terms of citizenship. And other times it's phrased in terms of personhood or just general rights that are afforded, either as against a particular institution. In the First Amendment, it's Congress, or just by virtue of your being a person in the United States. And the framers were smart people. They understood the nuances, and they were lawyers, and the distinctions between those terms. They knew what citizenship was. And so the question isn't whether or not they're afforded the same exact rights. It's what rights and when. And the First Amendment, I think, is included in that, and we can talk about that.
Well, so then it's going to boil down to an interpretation of the law. But what, and you can tell me what this is. What's INA 212 and 237?
Those are different provisions.
They're supposed to be,
those are laws. Those
are
statutes.
That's what it quoted me when it said immigration authorities can use advocacy as grounds for deportation under INA 212 and 237, which bar anyone who endorses or supports terrorist groups from staying in the U.S.
Okay, so
when it comes to green card holders or whatever. So again, I just need to know if you want to argue whether or not with the way things should be. I understand that, but I'm just talking about the way it currently is and what you have to contend with, like as it sits currently. That's what that's what I was talking about.
I'm talking about what's allowed.
I didn't know you were.
I'm talking about what is allowed currently. I'm not talking about what I'd like it to be. I'm talking about what's allowed.
Okay,
currently.
So that's what I was saying too.
So the number one mistake that you've just made, right? I think, and I think that we should be able to acknowledge this is a mistake. Is why in the blue hell are you relying on AI?
Is that not what those say?
Did you hear what I just asked you?
Yeah.
Why are you relying on AI?
Because it's not a crazy thing to do.
It is a crazy
First of all,
thing
I'm not relying on it. I'm not writing checks with this on it, right? I'm not going around trying to pay my bills with what ChatGPT tells me. So it's not. These are not like big consequential. Like I'm not making big life decisions based on what this. You see what I'm saying? So when it tells me something like that, that's easily verifiable.
ChatGPT will lie to you about the law. It's notorious for lying about the law. You cannot trust it on the law.
So is it wrong?
So I'm now going to explain to you what those provisions are, but I just need you to know, in a conversation with me or anybody.
I know that they're not infallible, sure.
No, yeah.
But I didn't come in here like armed with.
I'm just telling you, you should never rely on ChatGPT. Ever. You should never cite it. You should just look at the provision yourself under the INA or whatever legal issue that you're run into. Don't go to these AIs. If you want to use it to start your investigation, that's great, and I totally support that. But when it's the start and the end, okay, all right. So I'm sorry. Okay,
I literally just read about
those
this stuff
INA
yesterday,
provisions.
So it's not like
yeah. So those INA provisions apply to different grounds of inadmissibility and deportability. So you cited two, right? 212 and 237. Yeah. So different ground. So it's different under the U.S. code. They're codified differently. So some people will use the INA citations, and some people will use the United States Code citations. But they point to the same thing, and that is, as codified and as updated and as amended, different portions of the immigration law that make people either inadmissible or deportable. The differences between those are inadmissibility grounds generally apply to individuals who are trying to be inspected and admitted into the country, and deportability grounds apply to individuals who are in the country and are looking to be removed by the government while after they've been already lawfully inspected and admitted. Different nuances there that we're not going to get into. But that's why there's two provisions being cited. And to let you know, there are provisions of the INA that purport to make someone deportable or inadmissible on the basis of endorsement of quote unquote terrorist activity. So there are statutes within the INA that purport to make someone deportable on the basis of either being part of a member of a group that endorses terrorist activity as defined by the statute, or for people who just endorse or support terrorist activity. There are statutes that purport to do that. Okay. However, there are statutes that either as applied to an individual would be unconstitutional, and that means you can pass a law and that law can be on the books, but it's unconstitutional as applied to a certain group or when it's used in a certain way. That's one thing. And then number two is the administration.
Can you give me an example of that so I'd understand it? Because I don't understand what you mean.
So for example, let's say that there's a law that says the chief of the fire department shall be allowed to deny a permit of a certificate of occupancy to any dwelling that doesn't meet his specifications, right? Imagine that were a law and let's say it applies in DC. So Congress wrote it. Okay. So it's a congressional statute giving the fire chief the authority to deny a certificate of occupancy to any building or dwelling. Okay. And let's say that, so that's a law, right? It's a constitutional law. Let's say, but let's say the fire department starts saying, okay, my new specification is, as per my statute, it gives me the authority, black people aren't allowed to get certificates of occupancy. You think that's constitutional?
Okay, I see. I mean, I see what you're saying. I thought you meant the law. I thought you meant the law was written like no black people or whatever.
Well, you're
talking about the way that they use the law, not the law necessarily.
I actually do have some problems with the law as written as well, but even put that aside, we don't even have to get in the argument. As applied here, there's a
I understand what you're saying. Yeah.
Okay. So
you can apply a law that's not discriminatory or whatever in a discriminatory manner.
Right. If it gives discretion to certain people, or if it's written broadly, right? You can imagine a broadly written law that, if it's interpreted by the administrator, the executive, is done so in a way that is discriminatory on the basis of race or religion, right? Let's say on the basis of they start using, people accuse Biden of doing this. I don't necessarily agree in that case, but there were some very broad written health laws, and the question was, is he allowed to use this in such a way to force certain vaccine requirements in businesses or enforce certain OSHA requirements, right? So those are different arguments you can have about either the statutory scope of the law and constitutional. Now, in that case, it was statutory largely, but there are ways in which laws can be applied in unconstitutional ways. And again, I'm not conceding that the law is constitutional as written. I actually think that's probably unconstitutional as written. But what we have here is just because the INA purports to give certain authorities doesn't mean the use of those authorities in every particular instance is going to be constitutional or legal, or that.
Sure, I understand. Yeah. I understand that your argument there, but what I don't understand is where we're going to go from. Like, how are we going to get to supporting Hamas?
We're not there yet.
If that's not if they say literally supporting terrorist organization or advocating for terrorist organization, and that's literally what's being done. It's not a grotesque twisting of the law of the words. That's literally what it says. It's not. They're not selectively like. I guess they are kind of targeting him.
Let's talk about it a little bit.
But that was kind of targeting. They're kind of targeting that one terrorist organization. You know.
Let's talk about it just for a second. So. That's number one problem is just because the INA says something doesn't mean that that's the end of the analysis. The analysis continues on to any possible rights violations. And then number two big problem is the administration is not citing those provisions to make them deportable. So you can't rely on provisions that they're not citing. You know? Does that make sense?
Yeah. You'll laugh at this, but
yeah.
You know, ignorance of the law doesn't give you an excuse to break it. So, does that work in reverse?
No. Wait.
They just don't know. They just don't know the law.
No,
it's still legal, right? You know, whether or not they know it.
So they could have charged him with it. There might be other ways that they can make him deportable or removable, but we have to evaluate what they're actually citing, right?
Yeah, it was mainly a joke.
Okay. So
what are they trying to? If not that, what are they trying to do?
They're basically saying in his discretion, the Secretary of State has determined that he's a threat to nationals. It would not be in the national interest to keep him there. So it's a broad assertion of authority beyond terrorism.
Well, when I originally heard about all this, I was actually repulsed by it. I was like, "Oh, this is gross."
You should continue to be. You should be. You should be.
This is not what. And then the more I read about it, the more I thought about it, I was like, "Well."
So let's get into the First Amendment issues.
Do we really want like visa holders like over here advocating for terrorists like that?
Whether you do or not, let's
get into the issues. Same way with communists or whatever.
Right. You could say, imagine someone were to say like this: like, do we really want those guns in our country? Do we really want guns? Do we really want to have this? It's so burdensome to have this right of guns. Do we really want to like protect the right of people to keep and bear arms? What would you say in response to that?
I don't. Well, I just don't feel the analogy. It doesn't.
No, wait. What would you say in response to that? If someone said, "Hey, you know, do we really want to allow people to have guns? It seems like a bad idea."
I mean, my response would be like, "That's."
You say that's too bad, right?
It doesn't. Wait. With the way you feel about it is largely irrelevant.
Right, because that's how we do with rights. With rights, it doesn't matter if the majority thinks it's kind of a bad idea. It doesn't even matter if you can say, like, right, you would probably even say, even if it were true, that you could trace 80% of the gun violence in this country to the Second Amendment, right? Let's say that you could say that 80% were traceable, that if you got rid of the Second Amendment, in other words, you would get rid of 80% of the gun crime, right? Imagine. I'm not telling you that's how the world is, but imagine. What gun rights advocates would say is, that doesn't matter. The whole point of the Second Amendment is, even if the majority thinks that you would solve problems, and even if it's the case that you would solve some problems, the right is established here to be extra strong because we think that there's a long-term like aim of the right that needs to be guarded for the reasons related to tyranny, for reasons related to self-defense, perhaps. And so we're willing to take the cost of, you know, potentially bad outcomes with respect to guns for the sake of defending our rights and for long-term interests related to gun ownership.
Yeah.
And the same is often
true. I made
true
this exact argument with a friend last night who was telling me, you know, well, what about somebody that's like advocating for the KKK or something like that? And I said, well,
yeah, exactly.
I said, there's a certain amount of bullshit that you have to accept to have free speech. You know, and one of those, if you're not calling for violence or whatever, then you know you have to just grin and bear it, basically. Like, yeah, I know that the ultimate end, like that ideology, I know they want to kill all those people. I know that's what the underlying ideology recommends, but as long as they're not, you know, outwardly what do you call it, advocating for violence, you have to just say okay, and you have to put up with it because that's what free speech is. I understand that, but the variable in all this is that these people aren't citizens in the way that we are.
Let's finish the First Amendment.
They're guests here.
Let's finish the First Amendment analysis, and then we'll get there. So I think you agree that we ought to have robust rights. I think you agree that if statutes violate our rights, that they're not valid, right? They're not valid laws, and that they should be struck down. And
wait. Just because a law can be applied in a way that makes it
let me clarify what I'm saying.
It doesn't mean it should be struck down.
Yeah. So either the law needs to be struck down, or the specific invocation needs to be ruled ultra virus or not lawful. So either as applied or as written, the whatever the action is needs to be stopped because it's not in conformity with the law. Okay.
Hey, stay on your page.
So I think we agree on that. Let's ground down these First Amendment principles, and I think we'll have agreement there that if it's the case that you're a citizen, let's say you're a citizen, right? You agree, don't you, that it's legal and protected speech for American citizens at a bare minimum to advocate and argue that October 7th was justified and that Hamas is a great organization. That's justified. Or sorry, that's protected speech, right?
Yeah.
Okay. Because you can say the same thing about, yes, is the answer. The KKK, you could say the same thing about the Nazis. You could say the same thing about Russia, China, all these organizations. It's your First Amendment right. And what you said was perfect before is it has to cross that level of incitement, and that incitement standard is pretty high. In case you don't know, the case is called Brandenburg, and there are all these different factors that are issue. You have to have close proximity. You need to be talking about an imminent call for lawless action, so it can't just be
right. There's like time limitations and stuff.
Yeah. So for example, if I advocate on this platform, it might be against Twitch's TOS, but if I were to advocate and say something to the effect of, I think there should be an illegal, violent overthrow of the country at some point, that would not qualify.
That's not good enough. Yeah, right.
It's an abstract advocation for a legal action, but it's not imminent. And
sometime in the future, yeah.
Right. Mm-hmm. So that's how strong the right is. And it does lead to a lot of situations where you're allowing a bunch of very not useful speech, very bad speech. In the case of, I'm sure, a lot of Hamas supporters. Also, by the way, a lot of, I think, crazy Israel supporters as well. I'm just saying that. That's true. I think there's a lot of toxic rhetoric that comes out of some of these like pro-Israeli settler people. The same is true of like literal foreign agents oftentimes. Now there's different requirements that they have to register and all that stuff. But all that is to say, I'm just recognizing what you said before is it's a lot of trouble to protect people's rights. And sometimes it is annoying because they have all these negative consequences. Yes, you have to put up with a lot of shit. But I think we agree that if this individual were an American citizen and he were arrested for what he said, or you would be angry, and it wouldn't be good.
That'd be wild, yeah.
Right. And if someone said to you, "Well, he also occupied the building, but he wasn't charged with that," you'd be like, "Oh, but I don't care because he wasn't charged with that." And if someone else said to you, "Oh, but he also is a national security threat," you'd be like, "Okay, what's the crime?" Right? You would be questioning the rationales and the basis of whatever negative action is taking place against this person, right? It's not just enough that he might have done something else. It matters what the government is doing, what they're invoking, and what they're telling the people in the courts, right?
Right. I mean, it matters what they're charged with and whatever.
Exactly.
Or not charged with, because in this case they're not even being charged, but like.
But the analogy,
the reasoning matters.
Yeah, the rationale
matters,
for the deprivation, for the removal, for the charging, for this or that, right? If they were to, I gave you the example of this fire chief guy who's denying permits on the basis of race. He's not charging you; he's just denying you a permit, but it's based on some illegitimate, unconstitutional ground. In this case, race. So now we get to the question. So I think we're in agreement.
And it's that reasoning that makes the whole thing sour. Yeah.
Right. And let's say, for example, the government wasn't charging you for advocating for Hamas as an American citizen, but they say anyone who's advocating for Hamas and for October 7th cannot vote. Would you say the same thing, right? Even though it's not a criminal charge, it's still kind of deprivation, a significant deprivation penalty on the basis of protected speech, right?
Yeah, sure.
Okay. So now,
that makes sense.
So now the only thing that's stopping you from condemning this as against the violation is merely the fact that he is a lawful permanent resident and not an American citizen. Or you're not necessarily committed right now. You're into the discovery phase.
It was until because I thought they were actually using those statutes. Which, if they're not, and they're coming up with a whole new thing, then no, that's not really cool.
Yeah, but let's imagine they were.
See?
The problem is
if they were using the specific statutes that let them do this, that let immigration do this.
Well, then your critique still goes through.
In other words, if they were using the letter of the law or whatever, then I would say, yeah, that's the meaningful difference, is that they're not.
Your critique is still going to go through.
You're a guest in the country.
So we still need to deal with it, because there is a law that says that the Secretary of State is allowed to make determinations as to who's in the national interest and who's not in the national interest. Okay.
Oh, okay.
So there is still a law.
Then that's the only hang up. Then yeah.
Right. So
that's what that's the way I feel hinges on it. Yeah.
Yeah. Assume that. By the way, I'm only saying pro Hamas for purposes of this discussion. I think I always only facts. I always make it clear. Maybe I didn't make it clear in this conversation, but in previous conversations, that I'm assuming for the sake of this conversation that it's pro Hamas. But that's not my position that he's pro Hamas. I actually have not seen good evidence of that. It's not been presented to me. I know there were like Hamas pamphlets being given around, but I have no reason to believe that he is involved in that. But it's for this making this as strong as possible, the argument. Go ahead.
If there were pamphlets, would that be material support? Is that what that means?
So now you're getting into the question of this case called Holder versus Humanitarian
That's even worse. That's even worse than advocacy.
Well, hang on. Let's go back to the First Amendment issue. Let's say that as an American citizen, do you have the right to give out pamphlets of Hamas? Hamas pamphlets.
That I actually genuinely don't know.
So you think
if
it's
I were
possible?
to walk around handing out, I'm just saying, like, if somebody were like, "Hey, will you go hand out these ISIS pamphlets?" I'd be like,
No, independent. Assume
legal.
that you go online, you find ISIS pamphlets on a website. No one talks to you. You pull them off, and you print them out because you agree with them, and you hand them out to your fellow citizen. Do you have the right to do that in your mind?
I mean, the right.
You think you might not have the right?
The thing is, you're also asking me, would you do that? And like,
I'm not asking would you do that.
I would want to go to jail.
Would you do that? I'm not asking would you do that. I'm asking, do you think Americans have the right to do that?
I mean, I think you should be able to.
Okay, that's a should. I'm telling you now that if you do that, right, like you're just printing out ISIS pamphlets, let's say, and let's say the pamphlets don't advocate imminent lawless violence. They're not like child pornography. They're not some category of unprotected speech that is otherwise sanctionable by the government under these other categories.
Okay, yeah. I mean,
so what would stop you from having
protected,
the right? Yeah. Now maybe it's different if you're talking to ISIS and ISIS is saying, hey, you go deliver these pamphlets. Then we can talk about, okay, now we're getting into material support area and now we can break the law. Okay. I might even agree with you on that. Okay. If you're talking to ISIS and ISIS is communicating back to you and saying, hey, we want you to go deliver these pamphlets, then I think we have a conversation. But assume that it's just independent advocacy, that it's just really you seeing things that you agree with and printing them out and handing them out to people, right? Assume, in other words, that there's no communications between Hamas and this kid, which there haven't been alleged to have been.
But there's also, I would also, doing something like that, I would also have to say that yes, like it's protected, but you should also not be surprised when you wind up locked up for it.
Whether you should be surprised or not is not the question. I agree. Under this administration, you should not be surprised that they do unconstitutional things.
Any administration, if you do something like that, like, what was Plan B?
I don't know what to tell you. I'm not here to dispute whether or not it's surprising or not. That's not the argument. I'm also not surprised that this administration would do this. I actually think it is specific to this administration. I don't think the Biden administration would do this because I think they respect First Amendment rights more than this administration does. But that's also not the argument that we're here to discuss. But yeah, I think we would agree, right? If you're printing out pamphlets from another organization, even from a terrorist organization, right? The RT news articles that people just tweet out, those are effectively Russian propaganda as well. And I'm sure there are a lot of different examples of Iranian linked propaganda, Chinese linked propaganda that are literally made by those agents and that people are spreading. Yes. That's protected speech.
Yeah. So it is protected, sure, yeah.
Right. So now the only question then is, does this First Amendment principle protect non-citizens or aliens? That's the only question, because you said everything that you've heard of this guy would fall under First Amendment protected activities if you were a citizen. Fair?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, and that's been my thing the whole time.
So now let's talk about it. So assume that there's a law that gives discretion to immigration, to the State Department, whoever the actors are, to do this. Okay? Assume it, so that we don't have to get into a statutory argument. I'm going to assume, by the way, that there's sufficiently broad language in some of these INA statutes or some of these related statutes that gives certain governments, or purports to give certain governments, wide deference in how they deal with deportations or exclusions or removals. Okay? I'm going to assume for that.
Sure.
The question is, does the First Amendment protect this purported deportation? And I would argue unquestionably of this person. And I would argue, or similarly situated people, I would argue as well. I would argue unquestionably it does. And I start with the following principles. That the Supreme Court has explicitly recognized that the First Amendment protects, at a bare minimum, aliens who reside in the United States. That's an explicit holding of a case in 1945. That's bare minimum. So there's on-point precedent that says the First Amendment protects resident aliens. If that's the case, then I think as a starting ground, if the First Amendment protects those aliens, it must operate to protect them from certain things. And I do not believe that there's this categorical limitation of immigration where, okay, the First Amendment protects you, but only to the extent of the criminal law or other such things, but not immigration. The reason I think that is, there's other on-point precedent by the Supreme Court that says the Due Process Clause works to give resident aliens due process rights under the Fourth and 14th Amendment. Sorry, under the Fifth and 14th Amendments of the Constitution. So if immigration were in a special category in which the rights never applied to resident aliens, then why would it be different for the Fifth and 14th Amendments as opposed to the First? In other words, why would a special category of immigration grant, the due process rights, but not First Amendment rights? That seems so weird, and it doesn't seem to be in keeping with the Supreme Court's precedents.
Yeah, you're right, and to me, it's much more of a, at this level at least, it's much more of a vibes thing. Like basically, it seems like a non-citizen should be given First Amendment rights or First Amendment protection up to and include all the way up to advocating for the destruction of the country that you're a guest in, and at that point,
no, I think that should be protected too.
Right. Well, I mean,
it's
counterintuitive to me.
Yeah,
it's counterintuitive to me. Like to go into another country and then say like, hey, we should burn this motherfucker down.
Here's where I might give you something, right?
It's hard for me to say like, yeah, that should be protected because it's the same thing, and I know this is not a legal argument at all. I'm just telling you where my heart's at. I can talk shit about my family. I can talk shit about my country because if it's deserving, because it's my country and it's my family, you can fuck off.
Yeah, I know that feeling.
If you're not in my family, if you're not a part of my country, if you're not a citizen of my country, like you can't come here and talk shit about it. That's.
Yeah, no,
and expect everything to work out.
I get it, and I want to tell you two things that I think. One, where I can give you some grace, and where I can think that maybe there's some agreement, and two, where I think the analogy to the kind of guest sort of allegory that you put out, or analogy that you put out, my answer to that. So the first I want to say is there could be room for that kind of discretion by the government as recognized in our precedent at the point of admission. So when you are deciding, for example, who's going to become a green card holder, maybe outside of the country, who's you're going to let into the country, and maybe even I'm not decided on this. I probably would be against this, but I think you'd have a much more reasonable conversation if we're talking about people who are here on a transitory basis, people who are here maybe even illegally, right?
Work visas.
Work visas. Yeah. Maybe there you have more of a conversation. I'm pretty sure I would be against that, but I'm willing to have a conversation on those grounds. And I'm willing to have a conversation on the grounds of at the point of admission, right? When you're rejecting someone as opposed to deporting someone, because it's not intuitive that all the Constitution applies outside of the country, right? We know that foreign corporations, for example, don't have First Amendment rights. We know that. We do know that sometimes the First Amendment applies outside of the country, right? So we know that if you were to stop a citizen from coming into the country for speech-related grounds, we know that citizens still have their rights outside of the country, a lot of them at least, right? So I'm willing to have some plan.
But at that point, doesn't it just become like a function of time? Because he was not a citizen, like
yeah,
he was at your threshold not too long ago, you know?
Yeah, so, but those thresholds to me matter, right? Just like the threshold of naturalization. Once you're a citizen, we can't banish you. Once you're a citizen, we can't denaturalize you unless we can show that you did like fraud or there's other, or you've rescinded your citizenship, right?
But I'm saying in your, like in the example you just gave,
yeah,
you're like, what if it's, what you say, we're not going to deny you entry because we don't think that you do X, Y, and Z, sure.
Yeah, so it'd be different if it's fraud, right?
And then 10 minutes later, he's in the parking lot, you know, doing the thing.
Yeah, in that case, maybe
are you going to be like, well, shit, we let him in, you know?
Yeah, well, in a certain sense, yes, but also if there's a good fraud case where he lied about, he made representations that he had no intention at the time of keeping them, then we can have a different conversation. But at a certain threshold, yes, right? Like once you're in the same thing with the border. So it's
almost like, you know. Yeah, so it's almost like you're just
it's to protect people in the country, right?
People might get radicalized and might.
Yes, that's the cost of the First Amendment.
Might decide.
The way to protect
that, right?
The way to protect all of us is to have these kind of bright lines. And so yeah, it's the same thing when you cross the border without inspection and admission, you're subject to certain procedures that people who are just being turned away at the border don't get. Like once you've crossed the border. Once you've gone into the North, if you're in the South and you're a slave and you've just become free, right? There is I don't know if it's a metaphysical, but a legal distinction that I think should be imposed once you're inside the country. I do believe that as a geographical matter. So maybe it'll account for certain, certain situations where someone is out of the parking lot, immediately breaking what they promised to do. In that case, if it's a true like misrepresentation, then I think you have a fraud case where they made a promise at the time they made the promise, right. They had no intention of keeping. An example of this, by the way, is like people who come here on a guest visa with the intention of marrying here and having kids here, right? They say when they apply for their tourist visa, they have no intention of moving to the United States. Now, as it happens, it's possible for you to have no intention to move to the United States or to immigrate to the United States when you got that tourist visa. So you weren't actually lying. But when you come in here and you've met someone that you fall in love with and you get married because you just fall in love with them, you wouldn't have lied at the point of seeking admission to get entry into the country. So there's little shades of gray there, some play on the joints there that we can have reasonable conversations about. What I don't think we can have a reasonable conversation about, though, is when you're already geographically inside the country and you're an LPR, you're already a green card holder. That is something where the maximal amount, I think, of First Amendment protections should apply to you. That's my answer to the concerns about, well, aren't you a guest of the House? And there's still ways in which America can use its discretion to keep out undesirables, right? There's still ways that America can do that.
Sure.
And I don't think that you've given away all your ways of doing that by applying First Amendment principles within the country to people who are not just citizens. My second thing I want to say, and then I'll let you respond, and I've been talking for a while, is this house analogy, this guest analogy. I think that in some ways it's apt, right? You feel worse about an uninvited guest, let's say, who breaks the chandelier because he was never supposed to be there. This case is an invited guest.
Or advocates for your destruction. Yeah.
Sure. Here we have an invited guest.
I mean, just like make it as horrible as it is, because... Anyway, go ahead.
Sure. This is not an uninvited guest. This is an invited guest. And an invited guest, let's say, is breaking some social norm of the house. He's not yet a member of the house. He's not a family member. He's not a resident of the house or the apartment building or of the community, but he is an invited guest. And let's say that in the rules of your community, it says, we will not spank the children of our guests, or it even says more categorically, no spanking of children. We don't believe in that in this community. the fact that they're a guest into your, and they bring their annoying kid, right? And the annoying kid does something, and the guest does something that breaks the norms of the community and is undesirable. I think that community should still stay by their principles of no spanking, right? Or of no whatever the thing is. If they have,
that analogy is.
That's what I mean.
A little. Weird
it's a little tortured. It's a little
sure,
tortured, but I'm trying my best here to try to. This is supposed to be a self-limitation on ourselves, on our conduct, because we're so scared of government intrusions into these areas with respect to anybody. And here's why it's dangerous for Americans too. Is remember, you start letting people's rights be trampled on, you think it's going to end at green card holders. But once you grant it for green card holders, now we're not so sure. Now we have carte blanche. Obviously, anyone who's not a green card holder is not yet a citizen. But now, what if we combine this with the denaturalization theory that the government also has, right? Trump also thinks that there are a lot of people who aren't really citizens because the 14th Amendment doesn't apply to them because they were children, or he also wants to, by the way, deport U.S. citizens. He's talked about deporting U.S. citizens, sending people to Guantanamo Bay. You don't know in which ways these rights violations are going to accumulate and affect citizens. And so there's a reason why we're trying to protect this right of green card holders, not just because we care about green card holders, but also because we're concerned that an overreach by the government as to green card holders might have cascading effects as to citizens. Yeah. So it's both.
Yeah. I mean, I hear this argument a lot. Like you shouldn't punch Nazis because tomorrow they'll just say, okay, you're a Nazi, and they'll punch you.
And so those are my rationales as a policy matter and also as a legal matter. Yeah, we have on-point precedent that says First Amendment applies to these people. There's no reason we should think that some rights apply to the immigration process, due process rights, for example. You can't torture immigrants. You can't just throw them out on a boat in the middle of the Gulf of America, right? You can't do that. That's unconstitutional. That'd be cruel and unusual. It'd be against due process. So why is
that all makes sense? But you're fighting. You're fighting against a pretty strong. That's a big ask for a lot of citizens. Is to have people that they know
to support the Constitution of the United States.
To have people that they know. Well, no, because the normal people, most people, don't put this level of thought into it.
They should.
They think that person isn't a citizen, and they're advocating for the destruction of the country that they're in, your country. And it's really hard for you're gonna have to sit basically all of them down and explain it to them the way because sure when you lay it all out, it makes perfect sense. I get it. I understand your argument.
I appreciate that.
But
I appreciate that. I think you came at it in a really honest way. I appreciate the way you came in.
Oh yeah, that's what initially when I told you I wasn't trying to.
I know.
I just read that those statutes or whatever, and I was like, okay, well.
Yeah, you gotta be careful.
It seems like immigration can do this, and still I'm saying they can.
Thank you, John, for the $5.
Not right. It may not be right, but it looks like legally they can do it, right?
No, it doesn't. For the reasons we just talked about, First Amendment reasons, it doesn't look like, in my opinion.
So you can challenge it. You can challenge it, or whatever.
Yeah, but you can challenge anything, right? So like if the government came and took all your guns or took all your, or I don't know, beat you to within an inch of your life, yeah, you could probably sue them, or maybe there's some process by which that could be evaluated. But at the time that deprivation occurs, normal people can evaluate it. And I'm evaluating it under normal. I understand that they're citing laws, but the First Amendment is superior. The Supremacy Clause tells us that the Constitution is the supreme law of the land. All the laws made pursuant to it notwithstanding.
I got you.
Yeah. But I really think
it makes sense.
So I'll ask you, don't you think this is a bad thing to purport to deport someone, take away their green card on the basis of what would otherwise be protected speech activities by Americans?
Yeah, it's bad. Right. I thought it was bad. I thought it was bad initially. Okay. I just was saying that it looks like it's legal, but
Now you're not as sure, at least.
Well, no, I mean, no, I agree that if the law is if the letter of the law says yes, you can use discretion to do this, but the discretion that you use is something like a
Is
protected activity,
unconstitutional application of the
right?
discretion, right?
Then it would not be legal either.
And do you have
so yeah, I get it. You're right.
Hey man, hey, I super appreciate that, and I appreciate the good faith in which you.
And yeah, it means a lot coming from me because like I hate the shit out of most of what you say, and I always argue with you.
Yeah, I see you in the replies.
Like well, you don't reply to me anymore. Well, I figured you blocked me long ago. I was like, I'm gonna do it anyway though.
I don't really block that much. I'll see if I muted you. I don't think I.
So yeah, so it should mean that much more because I mean, like, and that's I never am not like this. If I feel like you're right, I'll just tell you you're right. And so in this case, you were right. But that
love it, man.
That doesn't mean you're right all the other times.
I know that. Hey, I can be wrong. Is there anything else you want to yell at me about?
No. Definitely could have come up with something had I had time to prepare.
Hey, if you come up with something, just message me. You can, add me on Discord or whatever. Message me on DM. I'll try. I'll see if I muted you on Twitter. I'll unmute you if I did.
All right, later, man.
Hey, man. Lots of good times. Thanks. Bye. Is this Fiery Patriot? I think I see your emoji.
Yeah.
How you doing, brother?
Hey, doing all right. How are you?
Yeah. How can I help you?
I was just talking about, or not talking about, the whole immigration thing that's going on with the deportations and El Salvador, all that stuff. First of all, UK just started leasing out space at whatever that place is called in El Salvador, that super prison CENTCOM or whatever it is.
Yeah.
And I think that Trump is playing it really well, and Democrats are playing it really poorly, because they'll do something where the news will break that, somebody was denied a visa, and they'll be like, she was a doctor, she did transplants, everybody feels so bad that she's not allowed back in the country. And then wait a day or two later, and it's like, oh yeah, where was she? Oh, she was in Lebanon. Okay, that's fine. People are allowed to go to Lebanon. What was she doing in Lebanon? Oh, just attending the funeral for the terrorist chief, the leader of Hezbollah. At which point, most normal people in the country will be like, oh, then she shouldn't be allowed back. She should have her visa revoked. Like, I mean, no normal person. I'm sure there are a bunch of lefties that love Hezbollah, not like Democrats, but like the super lefties that are like, Hezbollah is great, they're fantastic. But most normal people will be like, no, you don't get to go to, your dear leader of the terrorist group responsible for so many American deaths, go to the funeral to go mourn that guy, and then America be like,
American
yeah,
citizens?
We want you to come
back.
If
American citizen went to the funeral in Lebanon
of a citizen
of Nasrallah, and they try to get back to the country, would you say the country has the right to deny them?
No.
Okay. So we have to get into the meat. Like, when you say Trump is playing it well, I assume what you're saying is optically he is picking on targets that are like unsympathetic.
Yeah, and I do get, the road
that's the fascism playbook. Yeah, that's the strategy. He's encroaching. I mean, he's encroaching on people's rights. Yes, Americans and resident aliens
doesn't have a right to come to the country. A non-citizen doesn't have a right to come to the country.
Wait, hang on a second. I'm not saying that they have a substantive right to come into the country. But just because they may not have a substantive right to come into the country doesn't mean that the government can violate the Constitution in the process of rejecting them, or that they can do so for any reason whatsoever. So, for example, if a green card holder tried to get back into the country and they said, no, you can't come in, we don't let black people into the country, you would agree that's unconstitutional. The government can't do that, right?
I'm sorry, yes? Say that one more time.
So
I missed the word in there.
If a green card holder went abroad, let's say to some other country, and came back, and the country said, sorry, you have no vested right to enter the country, you have no substantive right to enter the country, and we're going to deny you because you're black, and we don't let black people into the country after this date.
I don't think so, because I believe the Secretary of State can only unilaterally revoke a green card if it has something to do with terrorism, which is why...
They say something like this. They say, we think that black people in general are more dangerous to American national security, and so we're not going to let black people into the country because it's a national security threat, and so you're black, and so you're not coming to the country.
We would... Well, first off, that's not true. But second
I'm not saying that that's true. It's a hypothetical.
black people would have to be a terrorist organization. Like Hezbollah is a terrorist organization.
No,
General
wait,
Muslim is not.
You're applying the logic of the statute. Imagine there were a law in the books that did something like the Secretary of State, in his discretion, may deny entry to any people who's a member of a terrorist group or racial group.
Okay, assuming that law could even stand, because
wait, why would it be unable to stand? If immigration, if we don't have to worry about the Constitution when it comes to people coming into the country or to immigrants, why would it matter if, as applied to citizens, it would be unacceptable? Unless you're conceding that the Constitution does matter, even for areas of immigration. Does it matter or not?
It matters. Like, so what do you mean the Constitution applies in areas of immigration?
So,
I mean,
if you're saying, I don't even know if that law could stand. I don't know if Congress should make a law that said the Secretary of State has the discretion to exclude people of certain racial groups into the country. You say, I don't even know if that could be constitutional.
The Constitution obviously doesn't apply to non-citizens in the sense of immigration, because you come down to the situation where, like, obviously there's a First Amendment right?
Wait, did you say the Constitution does not apply to non-citizens?
Right, and I'm going to give my example here. First Amendment right to say whatever you want. As a U.S. citizen, you can go abroad and come back saying whatever you want, death to America in the United States. But if you are in a different state applying for a visa to come here, or a different country applying for a visa to come here, and they look and you're saying death to America, we can obviously deny you. The First Amendment doesn't apply to you in that instance of immigration, right?
What if you are in the country? We'll get to the outside of the country. What if you're in the country as a green card holder and the country tries to deport you on the basis that you're a black person?
Because there is a law that was passed that says that you can.
The Secretary of State says in his discretion
on their race.
Yeah, imagine that even there's a law that says the Secretary of State, in his discretion, we believe in the policy that all people who are not citizens are here as guests. And the Secretary of State can come up with any basis under which to deport any alien. That's a law. It doesn't even, by its terms, the law doesn't even address racial groups. Okay? Let's just say there's a law, and there are laws that give a great amount of deference to executive officials on these kinds of matters. Okay? Imagine that pursuant to that discretion, the Secretary of State says, this person is a black person in the interest of the country. He needs to be deported. He's not a citizen. He has no substantive right to stay here. He shall be deported. Do you agree? Constitutional or unconstitutional, that action?
Well, if that law passed and was deemed constitutional, then...
No, I'm asking you if it's constitutional.
Oh, so, okay. So you're asking if we could pass a law that said that. I say no, that probably would not pass.
Why not? Why would not pass in terms of they wouldn't get the votes, or not pass in terms of it's unconstitutional?
Both.
Okay. Well, let's just deal with the constitutionality.
Okay.
So why would it not be constitutional to have such a law?
Because color is an immutable characteristic. It's not an ideology. It's not an actual organization. It's just an immutable.
What part of the Constitution would it violate for us to have that law?
Oh God, there are like 27 of these amendments, right?
I can tell you. I'm not gonna, so the 14th Amendment.
I think it's the equal application.
Close. Equal protection clause. So the 14th Amendment as incorporated to the federal government through the 5th Amendment. That's a precise answer because the 14th Amendment references state governments, but the 5th Amendment's due process clause is thought to reverse incorporate the equal protection clause as applied to the states. And so the precise answer is the equal protection clause as applied through the 5th Amendment. Okay. So it's unconstitutional because the Constitution says that we cannot disparage or we cannot infringe on the equal protections or deny the equal protection of the law to persons. Okay. And so you're, I think, correct in saying if there were such a law or such an application, that it would be unconstitutional, notwithstanding the fact it's applying to someone who is not a citizen. Of course, because the Constitution in the relevant provision does not refer to citizens. It refers to the right of people not to be denied the equal protection of the law.
So then why is the law allowing you to ban organizations? Why was that allowed to pass and not deemed unconstitutional?
What are you talking about? So which organization? So
like
first of all,
the organization of Hezbollah.
So first of all, we'll talk about that, and I'll talk in a second about that. understand that he is not being deported on that basis. He's not.
I'm not talking about him. I'm talking about the doctor. Yeah, the doctor lady.
Okay, but I'm bringing it to Mahmoud Khalil. Okay, I don't actually know the case of the doctor you're talking about that well. Okay, so I'll be able to talk about it more or in abstract. But in the case of Mahmoud Khalil, here's an individual who's not being deported on the basis of membership in a terrorist group. No one is accusing him of being a member of a terrorist group. No one in the government. Okay, he's not being accused of that. He's not being accused of engaging in terrorist action. He's not even being accused formally. No, he's not. The government is not alleging that.
Right.
Do you understand that the government? Do you understand the government is not alleging that?
No, not terrorist actions yet. No.
Yeah. They're not alleging him. He's a member of Hamas. Agreed. They're not alleging that.
Not explicitly. No.
Yes, they're not alleging that. They're not alleging that he had knowing communications with Hamas. What they're saying is he's a national security threat because he supports Hamas. Okay?
That's fair.
We're not even talking about those bases of deportability. We're talking about the Secretary of State's kind of unilateral discretion to say that he deem him as a national security threat because he supports
organizations and supporting terrorist organizations.
They first of all, they say he supports the terrorist Hamas. I'm conceding for the purpose of this argument. I don't think it's true. I don't have evidence that it's been shown to be true. That said, for the purpose of this discussion, let's assume he does support Hamas. You said just now, right, that the 14th Amendment, the part of the Constitution, would protect a green card holder from being deported on the basis of his race. Was that correct?
Yes.
Okay, so why wouldn't the First Amendment protect the constitutionally sort of protected activities of the green card holder with respect to that deportation? Why does one part of the Constitution apply and not the First Amendment?
Because I assume that the First Amendment was already weighed and considered, and there are exceptions for the First Amendment that have to be very specific, and the law specifically outlines support of terrorist groups.
So if the law says something that is unconstitutional, the Constitution wins, right?
That's up for the Supreme Court to decide. And
I know that it's up for the Supreme Court to decide, but
the courts have never had a problem with revoking the green card of a terrorist supporter before. It's only when Trump does it.
So you don't know the case law, right? You agree you have no idea what the case law is, right?
Yes, I would agree on that.
Okay, so why are you represented to know what the case law is?
I would say that that's just what it seems to me.
How does it seem that way to you if you just said that you don't have no idea what the case law is?
I mean, I'm just going on a gut here, man.
Yeah, you're going on, wait. So you admit that that you should retract your statement if you're just going off a gut and the Supreme Court hasn't had a problem before with certain.
Well, yeah, I wasn't trying to make a definitive statement. I was just saying, like, that's what it seems like to me. Obviously, you're the lawyer. Why does it seem that way to you? Tell me why I'm wrong.
If we say it seems that way to you, you just said it's going by your gut, but that's not a basis to say it seems that way to you, right?
My gut.
That's irrational, right? You can't say I know what the court has been okay with because of my gut if I don't know what the case law is.
I mean, I have kind of like a general understanding of things, so
it's
not like
you just said you don't have any awareness of the case law on.
I don't know the exact cases of everything. I know that there are principles within the First Amendment that there are exceptions to it, and I forget the terminology for it. They have to say it. Is it like not? It's strict scrutiny is the thing where it has to be like a clearly outlined thing that the law has to clearly state like what it is that they are prohibiting and that it has to be for the good of the country, something like that.
Compelling purpose, it's narrowly tailored, but we've already kind of done these cases, right? So you can support the KKK in this country, right?
Yeah, you can.
American citizen can support Hamas in this country, right? Yes. American citizen can support October 7th.
Well, hang on. Support Hamas.
Independent advocacy. Mostly, yeah. Assume it's all independent advocacy, which is that all that's being alleged here. Independent advocacy.
Oh, I don't know that that's
all that's being alleged. So let's go through this again. Is there any allegation that he communicated with Hamas?
Through court documents, I don't know. I don't know the court documents yet.
Do you have any evidence that they're alleging that he had any collaboration or communication with Hamas? Are you aware of any evidence that shows that anyone has alleged that from the government?
The only thing I've seen is just little like links, not anything to actually say, that he's been on.
So you don't have a concrete basis to say that like they're alleging.
Well,
that
and
he
I'm also
communicated
not
with
the State Department. Ben, we'll see.
I know,
more
but
they talk
you
more.
we don't know. There's no allegation that he had these communications with Hamas,
and he hasn't been deported yet.
Not for lack of trying. There's an order that's preventing him from being deported.
What? How do you know that they were trying, or that they were going to put him on a plane like yesterday?
They said they revoked the green card and they're going to put him into deportation.
Right, and instead they took him to a camp and they are responding to the court.
Okay, are we arguing about whether they're taking him to the court or deporting him? I thought we're talking about the First Amendment. I agree. He's been taken into detention and he has not yet been deported.
Right. They're fighting over that. And I think Rubio's going to win because the law says he has the right to revoke a green card of somebody. We're talking about,
okay, so if the law said that you're allowed to get rid of a racial group, would you say that Rubio's going to win?
If there is a hypothetical
would you say that Rubio's going to win?
I don't think that would stand up in court.
If there were a law that said that it's okay for the Secretary of State to deport a racial group, would you say Rubio's going to win because the law says it?
If the law's been on the books for long enough and hasn't been challenged before, I'd say he probably would get away with it.
Really? I mean, what if the law is not specific to the situation? It just gives a lot of discretion to the Secretary of State. And so, like I gave before an example, like we could have different laws.
But why are we talking about all these what ifs instead of the law that
because the law
that is being used?
Because just because the law says that the Secretary has the discretion to say someone has a national security interest and deport them doesn't mean that the courts won't have a second look, or doesn't mean that the law itself, as applied, could be applied in an unconstitutional manner. You understand that, right? There could be a law that you cite that says, I have the right to deport someone who's a national security threat, but the way that you determine that he's a national security threat is because he's black, right? I gave you that example where the written law is not unconstitutional or not discriminatory on its face, but the way it's applied is clearly unconstitutional under the precedent, right? That's a situation that we're in. Although I think that there are other provisions that aren't being cited that are unconstitutional, but the situation at a bare minimum that we're in is there is a discretion-laden provision of the INA that they're citing, and as applied, it's unconstitutional under the clear framework and precedent of the court. And you're saying, well, because the law says it, this application of the law, I think that they're going to win. What's your intuition on that? Especially when the only court action we've had on this has granted a halt to the petitioners. The habeas action so far has been successful. So what is your intuition? Why do you think that Rubio is going to win?
Well, for now, because I know a lot of times how criminal cases work, they put out like a charge or two charges in order to, or allegations or whatever, in order to start the process. And then if it is going to get fought out in court, they probably will lay out their entire case.
Okay, we can only examine what they've given us so far in the so let's only examine what we have available to us. We can't. You're saying they could come up with something else. I agree. They could come up with something else. They have not as of yet. So let's talk about what they've actually done. What they've actually done is said, because of protected speech activity. You agree, right? Non-citizen residents of this country have First Amendment rights. Do you agree with that?
I mostly agree with that.
Okay. If non-citizen residents have rights in this country, First Amendment rights, if that's the case, then if it's a violation of the First Amendment to punish someone for their otherwise independent advocacy, even of horrific things, why wouldn't you stand up and fight it when Trump does it against someone you don't like?
Okay, I think I don't know that they have like full First Amendment rights, and I may be completely wrong on this. But isn't the 14th Amendment something like that Congress shall pass no law that discriminates against race?
The First Amendment says Congress shall make no law abridging the freedom of speech.
Oh, that's right. Okay. Abridging the freedom of speech for
It doesn't say for citizens.
I don't know. Okay. My morals or like my intuition tells me that you should be able to get kicked out for something you say if you're on a green card. But you're right. I may be completely wrong on that.
For anything?
I still think that we're optically right.
No, well, I'm going to push you to either agree or disagree with the actual underlying action, regardless of the optics.
Okay,
so,
hang on 1 second.
So we're going to go through it, and regardless of whether or not you think it's a good optical win for Trump or not, let's come to a determination on whether or not you think it's correct.
Hang on. Okay, go for it.
Okay, so we have the First Amendment that says Congress shall make no law abridging the freedom of speech. We have on-point precedent, a case called Bridges from 1945 that literally says resident aliens have First Amendment rights. It literally says that. That's case law on precedent. We're talking about the law here. We have case law that suggests that that some kinds of membership in certain organizations can be a basis of removal for green card holders, but they're applying First Amendment principles to resident aliens. And so there's no indication in our case law that the First Amendment doesn't apply to non-citizens. There's a case called Holder versus Humanitarian Law Project that says certain levels of material support for foreign terrorist organizations can be a basis for criminal action. But here, there's no allegations of material support on for Khalil. And so why is it, or what is your opinion about whether it violates the First Amendment to kick out Khalil on the basis of his independent advocacy in favor of Hamas, assuming he did? I'm assuming for the sake of the hypothetical he did. What do you think? Do you think the First Amendment allows this?
Follows very closely to material support, and I also think that if you look into the funding of the organization that he's working for, that you'll find that it comes from shady enough sources.
Material support only relates to non-independent advocacy. Holder was very clear that they were talking about.
Well, it's not independent advocacy.
It is independent
advocating
advocacy.
He's advocating on behalf of an organization.
By independent, I mean not in communication with. They didn't communicate. There's no allegation.
But he is in communication with the organization that's
Hamas?
CUAD, whatever.
Okay, CUAD, are they a foreign terrorist organization? Have they been designated as such?
They have not. However,
so then
they
it doesn't
are
apply,
supporting of a terrorist organization. So basically,
wait, what's the evidence? Sorry, is there any allegation?
I am not
any allegation
member of Hamas. I am a member of this completely separate organization from Hamas that is just, vigorously advocating for Hamas.
Wait. So is there any evidence of communication between either that organization or Khalil himself with Hamas?
Shit.
Is there any allegation of that?
Saved any of that allegation, like in the court
by the
documents?
government?
No.
The government hasn't said that. So his membership in that group is a domestic organization. It's not a foreign terrorist organization. It's not been labeled a foreign terrorist organization. It's not even clear that the precedent on foreign terrorist organizations would apply to domestic organizations, even if they were foreign terrorist organizations. That would raise a can of worms where, like, I don't know, you're not allowed to give legal advice to members of domestic terrorist organizations. So it's not clear at all that that precedent applies to domestic organizations, and it's not been labeled as such. And so we're not in that world at all, and no allegations have been made on that. And so there's also, I'll cut to the chase, no allegations that Khalil himself has been communicating with or coordinating with Hamas. And so the material support type doctrines don't seem to apply to any of this conduct, because that was only non-independent advocacy that was covered by Holder versus Humanitarian Law Project. And what we have separately is Supreme Court precedent that tells us that resident aliens have First Amendment rights. And so how can we purport to deport someone on the basis of protected activity that's protected by the First Amendment? Thank you for the Ray Jola. Sorry, I didn't see it.
I mean, he also did, he was there during the initial takeover of Heinz Hall, which is criminal activity.
He's not being deported for that.
Yet. I mean,
no,
like
you
I
agree
said,
he's not being deported for that, right? Yeah.
Well, that evidence, or like the photos of him there and everything, didn't come out until after the initial thing, so I'm guessing that all of this is going to all be put in. He is
not being deported on the basis of trespass.
He's not being deported at the moment.
Well, he's not in detention. He has been arrested. He's been arrested. He's in detention. He's not being detained.
The government will show all of their case.
There's been no allegation.
Well, he's being detained because his green card has been revoked.
Do you agree, yes or no, that there's been no allegation?
Is allowed to revoke his green card.
Do you agree,
right?
yes or no, that there's been no allegation by the government that they are rescinding his green card or deporting him or trying to deport him on the basis of criminal activity?
Well, that's the thing. They did revoke his green card. Now it's up to the courts to say whether or not they were allowed to.
What did I just ask you? Do you remember?
Vaguely.
So I'm trying to be clear. So what I'm asking you is...
You talk very fast.
Okay.
It's difficult sometimes.
Do you have a reason to think or believe that the basis of the attempted deportation by the government of Mahmoud Khalil has to do with criminal activity?
I believe that it probably does. However, that they didn't throw all that out there. They just said.
So you agree they have not alleged it? They said they're not accusing him of any.
I would agree that they have not filed anything saying that yet.
So we can't. You're saying that you think that might relate to the criminal activity, but that isn't the grounds under which they're trying to deport him. Agreed?
Under the grounds of revoking his green card? No.
Yeah.
Agreed.
So we might have a different case if they charged him with a crime and they went through those procedures and they found he was deportable because he was part of a riot. I probably wouldn't be here defending him.
Oh, okay. Well,
but that's not why he's
willing to bet. I'm willing to bet that that's all going to come out. The Trump administration is trying to do stuff.
Okay, but we can only assess what has actually been alleged, right? You could say that someone's been charged with a crime, right? And, you agree that he did some crimes, but if he's not been charged with those crimes, you would say that's wrong for them to charge him with something he hasn't done, right?
He's not being... No, I don't... Basically, they're saying, okay, you supported Hamas, I'm revoking your green card, I have that right as Secretary of State. Now the court says, no, actually you don't, and they're going to fight it out in court. And I'm pretty sure that that's
I don't know why you're trying
all
to
of
get
the
away
other
from
evidence
this.
is going to come out.
So why are we zooming out, right? I'm trying to be very specific. The question is, we can only analyze.
Well, you're trying to be very specific and say, I want to analyze this specific aspect.
What's actually happened, right? We should analyze what's happened.
Well, what's actually happened is they revoked his green card for one reason, saying that he was supporting Hamas.
Is it unreasonable for me to say, let's look at that
And
case?
the law says you can revoke a person's green card for supporting Hamas. So the Secretary of State said, okay, the law says I can do it. I am doing it. Boom. And then now the court is saying
you keep zooming out, right? You keep zooming out to the chronology of what's happening. You want to take an overview of what's happening. I'm not interested in that. Let's go step by step, right? We're examining the First Amendment issues, and
should
you keep
Rubio
zooming
look
out.
at the law then and say like, oh,
you don't even know what law, what the purported
actually...
basis is of the purported removal or attempted removal. You don't even know what that is, right?
That he was supporting Hamas.
Sorry, what part? No, that's not the basis of his removal. The statute at issue has to do with broader national security determinations. It's not about specific to foreign terrorist organizations. There's other laws that do that, but they're not charging him as a removal.
I read it. I might have just read like an overview.
You just read a tweet where someone's citing something, but that's
not. No, I didn't read a tweet. I was reading like how visas can be revoked, and on there it said, and I'm sure it was just an overview and not the actual case law. I'm not a lawyer. I don't really read case law. I look at kind of overviews of things because, I'm not a lawyer. But it said that the Secretary of State has virtually unilateral rights to or ability to revoke a green card of somebody that's
for any reason, right?
Not for any reason. It doesn't say for any reason.
Well, what if he determines what if he determines that someone's a national security threat because they're black?
Well, I mean, it literally specifically says terrorist organization. That's what the law says. You would have to pass a new law.
Sorry, you don't even know what law you're citing. Agreed? You don't know what the law says, right?
Okay, then the overview I read would say for any reason, not specifically for terrorist organizations.
So there is a subset of laws that are specific to terrorist organizations. There are those laws. That's not what he's been charged for as being removable, right? When I say this, that's not the basis.
You don't have to be charged to have your green card
I specifically said charged as removable. You understand what I said? Charged as removable, not charged with a crime.
Okay, so we're talking about two separate things then. His green card being revoked and then the deportation order being two separate things?
No, you're
because you can revoke a green card without deporting somebody, can't you?
Step back for a second, okay? So
okay.
We're talking.
Wait, you said I was stepping too far back, and now you said I'm too close.
Yes, no, but like you need to just follow me. I'm talking about step back in the meta of the conversation right now. All right. I'm not going to get tripped up on these little procedural or nuances, distinctions. I'm telling you everything I'm telling you with the kind of detail and clarity that so that I'm not kind of conflating the criminal basis of removability with the security basis of removability with the terrorism basis of removability. I'm trying to be as clear and concise and precise as possible. So when I tell you, for example, that the basis of his alleged removability has to do with more generic national security determinations and not terrorism specific determinations, I'm telling you that because I know, okay? And they're different. And when I say charged as removable, I'm not implying that he is needs to be charged with a crime. So don't try to trip me up on that stuff. I'm trying to be clear. I know the law that's at issue here. You don't.
Correct.
Okay, so let's talk about it. If Marco Rubio said he has Middle Eastern heritage, and that makes him a national security threat, and it's against the national security interest of the United States to have people with Middle Eastern heritage in the United States, and so I'm removing him, would you say that is constitutional? I mean, the law gives Rubio the power to determine national security interests of the United States and to remove aliens on that basis. Would you say that's okay?
I would say if the law said that, then it would be okay for Rubio to attempt to do it. Yeah.
It would be okay for Rubio to attempt to remove someone on the basis of their skin color.
If
wait, can you say that out loud? Is that yes or no? Is that yes or no?
If the law
I asked yes or you can say yes or no, and then you can answer, or I don't know.
Based on your hypothetical, I would say yes.
It would be okay in your mind for Rubio to
not
attempt.
Okay, like morally okay. I was saying that it wouldn't be
illegal.
It wouldn't be a problem.
You don't think it would be illegal to attempt to remove someone, a resident alien in this country, on the basis of their skin color? You don't think that's illegal?
I know it's illegal now because there is no law that says that is legal.
There's a law that says that. Illegal. Wait, there's a law that says that Rubio can determine national security threats and remove aliens on the basis of.
So you're saying that there is a law that says he can do it. There's a law that. Do I think it's illegal for him to do it? I would say no. It's not illegal for him to follow the law.
Bro. Okay, let's actually pull up the law.
If you say that there's a law that says you can,
we're gonna pull up the law.
The law that says you can remove people based on their skin color?
That's not what I said. The law says that you can make determinations.
You said, assuming that there was a law that you could revoke a green card for somebody's skin color, would it be okay if he revoked it?
Let me be 100%.
You're saying clear. If there was a law saying he could, would it be illegal for him to do it?
Let me be very clear about what I'm talking about here. Okay, I'm gonna be incredibly clear. So we're talking about part of the INA. Okay, I'm going to pull it up so chat can see it. So this is 8 USC 1227. All right, these are the bases of deportability. Okay, deportability are the standards that are applied to people who have been inspected and admitted generally into the country. You feel me? So as a green card holder...
So hang on. We were talking about first revoking the green card, right?
Yeah, if you're removing someone, it's going to be attendant to that removal. You could revoke the green card.
Well, don't you have to do the two separate things, revoke the green card and then deport? And aren't there different rights and things?
You don't have to construe them. You don't have to construe them as separate for purposes of this discussion.
You don't have to, but doesn't the law explicitly give him the authority to remove the green card, and then there's separate laws that apply to whether or not you can. You don't know shit,
so why are you speculating? Why are you speculating that it's a two-tier process?
Well, I literally asked you a question.
I'm telling you, you're confusing yourself, and only worry about the removal proceedings, all right? They're
telling me
they're charging him as deportable and removable on a particular basis, and it's all going to ground out into the same thing, both the denial of the rescinding of the visa and the removable. It's all going to ground out into the same kind of analysis. So don't confuse yourself and overcomplicate it. All we're looking at is the removal authority at this point. There's no dispute that he's a green card holder. Green card holders can do things that make them removable and deportable. And when they do...
But he was a green card holder.
He's a green card holder, okay? There's no dispute about that.
Was a green card holder.
Okay. So, no, he is a green card holder.
He was a green card holder.
Well, if what they did was illegal, then you would admit that that's...
Then they can reinstate his green card. He doesn't have one now.
Yeah, well... If it's ultra virus, if it's not lawful, then he's still LPR. So that'll, I suppose, be adjudicated. At the time, at the time he was charged as removal. At the time, he has. Do you agree, yes or no? At the time he was picked up, he was a green card holder. When they are charging him as removable,
I believe they revoked his green card before they went to pick him up.
Oh my God! All right, let's just stay focused, okay? Let's stay focused. I'm doing my best to be patient with you. All right. So these are the bases for deportability. He was already admitted and inspected into the country, and so we're applying the standards for deportability, okay? This is what I'm showing you. This is 8 USC 1227. I'll scroll out so you can see the number.
Yeah, you may need to resize it a little bit. It's cut off.
Okay.
Oh, and bear with me because the stream's a little bit delayed from the Discord call.
Yep. Okay. So you see this?
Okay, yeah.
Deportable aliens. So this is classes of deportable aliens, sub A. All right. So you are deportable if you're one of these. And we come down to A sub 4, sub C. A sub 4. This is sub 3. Sub 4, security and related grounds, sub C. So do you see where sub B says terrorist activities?
One sec, it's still showing you scrolling down to it on my. Okay, security related grounds in general. Wait, what's sub A though?
Don't worry about why are you worrying about sub A?
Oh, I just thought I saw something while you were scrolling by, but that's fine. So okay, foreign policy, presence or activities in the United States, the Secretary of State has reasonable grounds to believe would have potentially serious
Sorry,
adverse.
do you remember what I just asked you?
No, because I was trying to.
So you should, okay, then ask me to re-ask it. Okay, so I see. I'm,
okay, yeah, go for it.
What I'm asking you is, you see that there's sub B and sub C, and one says terrorist activity, the other says foreign policy. Okay.
Yeah.
Sub B is what a lot of people are citing as affiliation, because this points to the grounds of inadmissibility. All right. And it points to some other part of the inadmissibility grounds, and it essentially incorporates it, like if you endorse or support terrorist activity, okay, as defined by the statute. That's one of the bases of inadmissibility, and therefore, by incorporation, deportability. Okay. He has not been. This has not been the basis cited for his removal. Okay.
Okay.
The basis of citing for his removal is sub C. Sub C, sub 1, little 1, Roman numeral little 1. In general,
Yeah, I see it.
an alien whose presence or activities in the United States, the Secretary of State, has reasonable grounds to believe would have potentially serious adverse foreign policy consequences for the United States is deportable. Okay? So here was my question for you.
That's even better than.
Wait, agree that none of this says terrorism,
I see
right?
where you're going now.
You said agreed. None of this is terrorism, right?
Yes.
All right. So they don't have to show that he supports terrorism for him to be deportable under the statute, right?
Correct.
The Secretary of State just has to have reasonable grounds to believe he would have potentially serious adverse foreign policy consequences to deport, okay?
Yeah, and that definitely sounds like this guy.
Okay, so now imagine the following situation. Imagine the Secretary of State says, pursuant to INA 122, US 8 USC 1227, sub 4, sub C, sub I, pursuant to that statute, I have determined that Mahmoud Khalil is brown. His skin color is brown. And I have determined that I have reasonable grounds to believe that brown people would have potentially serious adverse foreign policy consequences for the United States. And on that basis, he is deportable. Would you say in that situation that Marco Rubio has the right to deport him?
No, because that would not be a reasonable ground to believe. The reasonable ground to believe would kind of exclude just being brown, wouldn't it?
Hang on a second. Let's say that the Marco Rubio has all these findings. Say brown people in general, they cause a lot of problems in the country for the same reasons. Brown people are more likely to support terrorist activities. And let's say that he's even more specific and he says, brown people with Middle Eastern heritage.
So that he has factual findings that all of that is true.
He says it, right? Is it up for the courts to question his determinations?
Well, I mean, we think we could all agree that Hamas is an adverse to U.S. foreign policy, right?
That's not what I asked. What did I just ask?
Oh, that if he just says it?
Yeah, so he says we can't abide by having all of these people with Middle Eastern heritage in our country. They're much more likely to support Hamas, and the best way for us to get rid of these Hamas supporters is to get rid of these Middle Eastern people.
I personally think you should just go after the Hamas people.
That's not what I asked. I didn't ask what you personally support.
I know. I would say I don't think that would hold up at all in court.
Why?
Because I don't think that he would be able to prove that he has a reasonable ground to believe that.
But okay. Assume that the findings. Let's say that they were true, right? Let's say that it's true that Middle Eastern people in this country 99% support Hamas. So suppose that there was completely factually true that you have 99% support by Middle Eastern people of Hamas.
Okay, then yeah, get him out. Fuck it.
You still think that a restriction on the basis of skin color would be acceptable? If it were actually
you didn't
true,
say skin color, you said Middle Eastern.
Yeah, Middle Eastern people,
and that they 99% support Hamas.
Yeah.
Then yeah, because you're kicking them out based on the 99% support Hamas part.
Okay. Now you understand that there's an equal protection clause, right?
Yes.
And that one of the bases that is suspect, right, is racial groups. So Middle Eastern brown-skinned individuals, that if that's your basis for removal, that's an area where the Constitution is supposed to protect. Those kinds of discriminatory policies.
Yes.
Okay, so why is this acceptable? Why would it be acceptable for Marco Rubio under the Equal Protection Clause to deport people on a purported security basis when it violates the Fifth Amendment? Or sorry, the 14th Amendment, as applied to the Fifth Amendment.
I think that if the whole 99% thing was true, that we would definitely change the Constitution to specifically target that group. Here's what I just don't get. Like, he's a member of an organization. Organizing.
Stop. We're not zooming out. So I want to make you answer the racial question. Assume that there's that part of his analysis incorporates racial discrimination.
So are you just assuming that this subsection 1 here is just unconstitutional?
No, it's not what I said. I'm asking you if
the application... It sounds like you're saying it because you're saying if... So you're saying if there was reasonable grounds to believe that you would have a potentially serious adverse foreign policy, etc., that you cannot deport them if you're doing it because...
No, I'm saying as applied. Okay. Do you understand as applied versus facial challenge? An as applied challenge means, okay, maybe the whole law isn't unconstitutional. Maybe it's not wholly unconstitutional. But as applied, right? So
you think it is unconstitutional?
Do you understand what I just said?
You said maybe it's not unconstitutional or wholly unconstitutional, so you kind of gave away that you don't
No. Very carefully, right? So the law itself, like the facial law, maybe you can't strike it down as being unconstitutional, okay? But the law as applied in a particular context is unconstitutional.
Okay, so basing your case solely on things that he has said, you can't do this.
Right. So imagine he says something like this, right? Imagine he says Muslims are a security threat and have serious adverse foreign policy consequences. And so we want to, if you're a Muslim, you are deportable.
I would say no, obviously, because of the 14th Amendment. And so now
now it's the First Amendment.
Right. Yep.
There's no religious... You can't establish a religion, and you can't prohibit the free exercise of religion. And one of the obvious ways that you do that is by having restrictions based on religion, like this, where you're saying you're deportable just because you're a Muslim. Notwithstanding that, maybe he actually legitimately thinks that Muslims pose a serious foreign policy consequences. So you would agree, right, that law, as applied in that context, in an actual case where you're making people deportable on the basis of their Islamic faith, that would be unconstitutional as applied. Would you?
I would say, okay, so as applied solely on the Islamic faith, I would say that would be unconstitutional under the First Amendment.
So if you think that basing your decision under this subsection of the INA on religious grounds under the First Amendment would be unconstitutional, wouldn't you also agree that basing your determination of national security threat based solely on free speech under this provision would also be unconstitutional?
Okay, yeah, I'd agree.
Awesome. Hey, thanks. So you agree that it's therefore an attack on the First Amendment for the administration to do this?
I'm still on a wait and see. I do want to see if they bring out more allegations. So if they do it solely based on things that he said like is currently alleged, then yep,
love to see it, bro.
Yeah,
hey,
I'd have to agree.
This was a difficult conversation, but I love that. And listen, you can still hate Hamas. I hate Hamas. All right, and you can still say that he's deportable if they show that he did a crime, or you could say he's deportable if they show that he was talking to Hamas all the time. And then you might even have someone who says me that yeah, they could do that, even though we might have a disagreement on how they did it and how they started doing it, that he could be deportable for other reasons. So I think it's reasonable for you to be like, all right, well, if they come up with new reasons, I might consider it there. But I'm glad that you agree that the Trump administration shouldn't be doing this. They shouldn't be making, if there's another ground to deport him, they should say that, but they shouldn't make him deportable just because of his First Amendment supported activities, especially when there's case law that says the First Amendment applies to resident aliens.
All right. Yep. I agree with that.
Yeah, bro.
And sorry for being dumb, chat.
No, you're good. You're good. Hey, I appreciate that you were willing to walk it through with me. And listen, this is all part of the process. And thank you so much for considering and for watching.
Oh, thanks for having me, man.
Much love, brother. Talk soon.